If you've been watching my recent videos, you'll know that I've been a little obsessed with color theory lately, and it's totally changed the way I approach my coloring. So today I'll be demonstrating 5 key color theory techniques / principles that I've been exploring. Some I've experimented with before, others I'm trying for the very first time in this video, and my hope is that these techniques will help you create more effective color palettes, better pencil combinations, or even just help you create a stronger sense of mood in your coloring, because I definitely know they've done that for me. Then at the end, I'll be putting 2 bonus techniques head to head on a single coloring page. I've mentioned both of these techniques before and I've just been dying to compare them, so this video felt like the perfect opportunity to do so. Definitely stick around to see how that experiment turns out. But first, let's start off with a classic in the color theory world, which is complementary color palettes. A complementary color palette is usually one of the first things people will talk about when it comes to color theory, but in case if you're unfamiliar, complementary colors are those that sit directly opposite each other on the color wheel, like red and green, blue and orange, or purple and yellow. What makes them so powerful is how they interact when placed side by side. They instantly create contrast and vibrancy. Now, just so you know, for all of the mini demonstrations in today's video, I'm going to be coloring a couple of vignettes from Johanna Basford's Small Victories. These vignettes are actually a digital freebie that you can download directly from Johanna's website. I'll try to remember to link it below because I know we all need some great coloring practice resources from time to time. However, my printer didn't do the best job at printing out these little vignette illustrations, so you'll have to forgive me for the slightly fuzzy printing quality. But moving on, in a coloring page context, a complementary color scheme really is perfect for when you want your subject to pop off the page, or you just want to create a really bold and energetic vibe. If you're going for high drama, you'll want each color in your complementary palette to be equal on the page, equally as dominant. Think of it like a 50-50 split. So as you can see here, I tried to do exactly that using the complementary colors of blue and orange, and yeah, the orange totally pops against the blue background, making what I think is a pair the clear star of the show. However, if both colors are equally bright and saturated, the contrast can sometimes feel a little bit intense. Personally, I love vibrancy and drama, but if you prefer something more subtle, what you can do is let one color take center stage while the other plays a supporting role. For example, in this version of the little pear house that I colored, I let the blue dominate and used its orange complement as a soft accent to suggest lighting coming from the pear house windows. Honestly, I think both approaches are equally as effective. Whether you go for full-on contrast or something softer, I really think that complementary color palettes are one of the easiest ways to take a flat page and make it burst with life. Let's move on. Another popular color theory method is basically the opposite of complementary colors, and that is analogous colors. These are colors that sit right next to each other on the color wheel, so you're talking blue, teal and green, or red, orange and yellow. Because they're neighbors, they naturally blend and flow together, creating a really harmonious and calming effect on a coloring page. Even though I love contrast and drama in my coloring work, I do find myself gravitating towards analogous color schemes quite often, just because you can always guarantee a cohesive, unified look. I personally think that an analogous color scheme can work for any subject or theme in a coloring page, but the vibe can completely change depending on what part of the color wheel that you're in. Cool analogous schemes like blue, teal, and green evoke a real sense of calm and tranquility. That's really perfect for underwater water or winter scenes, whereas warm analogous palettes like the red, orange, and yellow I'm using here feel quite cozy, cheerful, and like full of energy. I personally felt like a warm palette suited this vignette perfectly. It has such cozy vibes with the tiny lantern and the steam puffing from the teapot spout. A cool palette wouldn't have been wrong, but leaning into the warmth really amplifies the mood I imagine Johanna was going for with this illustration. So if you're ever feeling overwhelmed by color choices or want to set a specific mood for your page, using analogous colors is a foolproof way to create unity, flow, and just an overall beautifully cohesive completed page. Now, seamlessly segueing from cool and warm color palettes, another great technique that I've recently learned about and I'm gonna try for the first time with you on camera today is, wait, what is it? Color temperature shifting. Instead of committing to one overall temperature like entirely cool tones or entirely warm tones, this technique involves intentionally shifting between the two to guide the viewer's eye and create a greater sense of depth on your page. The basic idea is that warm colors, red, orange, and yellow, tend to come forward, while cool colors, blues, greens, and purples, tend to recede into the back. So by strategically transitioning between warm and cool areas, you can create a great sense of dimension and subtly tell the viewer what sits in the foreground and what sits further back. I ended up adding a few extra leaf details behind this illustration so I could really showcase the color temperature shifting technique in action. And so I used a cool tone green, almost leaning toward blue for the leaves in the background, as well as the background itself. And then everything in the foreground was colored with warmer tones. And like I mentioned earlier, this was my first time intentionally trying this technique. And wow, it really is super effective. It generally gave the impression that those cooler toned leaves were sitting further back behind the house, while the warmer ones appeared closer to the front. You'll also notice that I added a few touches of warmer green on the tips of the background leaves, just to suggest that those areas were catching a bit of the light, and I think that worked pretty well. While I imagine this technique truly shines with forest or nature type pages, I have no doubt you could apply it to any subject. In a portrait, for instance, you might warm up the skin tones where the light hits and then shift to cooler tones in the shadows to create that, deeper sense of life and realism. Even something as simple as a mandala, I feel like you could cluster the warmer tones into one section and then gradually transition into cooler tones in other areas of the mandala. But yeah, I will 1000% be using this technique again because even from this little small demo, I can already tell it's going to be such an effective way to enhance contrast, depth, and focus in a coloring page. Another color theory technique that I hadn't tried before filming this video is the 60-30-10 rule. This concept actually comes from interior design, but works equally great for coloring pages too. The idea is fairly simple. What you do is divide your colors into 3 proportions. About 60% of your page will be one dominant color family, 30% should be a color that supports it, and the final 10% is your accent color. The one that adds that little extra spark and just a bit of pizzazz to the overall composition. Similar to what I was talking about with complementary color palettes, when you use every color equally, your pages can look a little bit overwhelming and very busy. This rule is supposed to help avoid that. By giving one color dominance, your eyes know immediately where to focus, and so the rest of the colors kind of just fall nicely into place. Now, I probably ended up going a little closer to 70% rather than 60% for this vignette, but essentially I made orange my dominant color, green my secondary, and purple was my accent. And yes, I definitely think you can see here how the 60-30-10 rule gave the illustration that nice visual balance that it's intended to do. I can imagine it would be even more effective in in a larger coloring page context. Like picture a bouquet of flowers, for example. You know, you've got 60% of the page as soft pink petals, 30% is green leaves, and then 10% is the bright yellow centers of the flowers. Suddenly, the page would just have so much more structure and intention behind it. So yeah, if you ever feel like your pages are looking a little bit random or colors are competing with one another on the page, try applying the 60-30-10 rule. I'm sure you'll notice an immediate difference. And the final technique we're going to talk about before diving into my bonus experiment is a technique that I've decided to unofficially dub as color popping, just because I think it sounds fun. Basically, it's all about creating one or more focal points in your coloring by contrasting bright, saturated colors with more muted tones. For example, you might start off with desaturated, earthy tones for your page. We're talking things like olive greens, dusty blues, or more earthy browns. And then I'm sure you know where I'm going with this. Then you choose the areas of the page that you want your viewers' eyes to gravitate towards and make those spots brighter and saturated. You can see me doing that here. I colored most of the illustration in darker, less vibrant greens, purples, and browns, and then used a bright hot pink for the elements I wanted to stand out. I probably shouldn't have done pink for the background since it ended up detracting from those pink highlights within the center of the illustration, but yeah, I still like how it turned out. No harm, no foul. The whole reason this technique works is because as humans, our eyes just naturally go towards whatever is the brightest spot in a composition. So when you use this color popping effect, it takes a page from looking too uniform and gives it a little bit of a spotlight moment instead. So those are the 5 color theory principles and techniques that I've been learning and absolutely loving recently. And yeah, they've definitely changed the way I approach my coloring pages. I am 100% going to be using that color shifting technique in my future pages now. I feel like in a coloring page context, like in a larger context, it's going to be so effective. But now it's time for my little coloring experiment, the one I've been dying to try for weeks now. As most of you probably know, I've been experimenting with the complementary shadow technique recently, and I'm completely obsessed with it. If you haven't seen it yet, check out my 9 coloring techniques video if you want a full breakdown. But since I've loved that technique so much, I've also been dabbling in analogous shadows as well. And what better way to see the difference between the two than putting them head to head on a singular coloring page, complementary shadows versus analogous shadows. Now, I didn't end up coloring an entire page. Unfortunately, I do not have that kind of time on my hands. I wish I did, but alas, I do not. So instead, I focused on coloring just the moth element of this page from Johanna Basford's Worlds of Wonder. I actually ended up filming and coloring this experiment a little bizarrely because my initial plan was to split the moth vertically, the left side using complementary shadows and the right side analogous shadows. But halfway through the complementary side, I kind of realized that the finished page would look, I don't know, a little bit odd with one half of the moth colored one way and the other half colored another. This was an experiment, but I still wanted to end up with a completed page that I could be proud of. So instead, I decided to color the top half of the moth using the complementary shadow technique and the bottom half with analogous shadows. You probably didn't need to know all those details, but there you go, now you do. Anyway, you would have noticed in the previous clip that I initially laid down a light base layer with my polychromos, just so I knew what the main color of each part of the moth would be, more for planning purposes rather than anything else. And then yeah, I just jumped straight into it. For my orange color combo, I used a dark blue for the shadows, since blue is opposite orange on the color wheel. For yellow, I used purple. For blue, I obviously went with orange. And then for the peachy salmon shade, things got a little trickier. I ended up using a slightly darker powder blue color. I think I was a little off the mark with that one, but it still was fine in the end. And as you watch me color this section of the moth, you'll really start to notice how the complementary technique creates such a punchy contrast in the shadows. I'm definitely still getting the hang of this method myself. Learning how to pick complementary shadow colors that are the right depth and tone is a another skill in itself. But I just love the dynamic, high energy vibe that this technique creates. And then for the bottom half of the moth, as you already know, I took the opposite approach and only used analogous shadow colors. That means I shaded with colors that sat right next to the base color on the color wheel. This differs a bit from the complementary technique because in this case, you actually have two shadow colors that you can choose from. So for orange, for example, I could have gone with either red orange or yellow orange for my shadow shade, since both sit next to orange on the wheel. But ultimately, I did go with a deep red orange. And then in regards to the rest of the colors, for blue, I used a deep blue violet. For yellow, a deep yellow green. And then once again, the peach color completely threw me for a loop. I ended up choosing this kind of deep purpley pink color, which probably wasn't quite right, but your gal's doing her best. Immediately, you can see how different the vibe is here. It feels softer, more cohesive and natural. Nothing jumps out too aggressively. Instead, the colors meld together in a way that feels calm, balanced, and unified. And then once both sides of the moth were complete, this is what the page looked like. And yeah, the difference is so clear. The complementary shadows on the top wings really grab your attention right away. It's a very bold, dynamic, and striking effect. I feel like I'm using the same words, but I'm trying to drive it home for you. And then in contrast, the analogous shadows on the bottom wings, they feel more harmonious, soothing, and flowy. There's a little bit less depth overall, but because there aren't any muddy blends, those wings on the bottom come across a little bit more cheerful and bright, light, and airy. I actually wish that I'd swapped the techniques around on this page and done the complementary shadows on the bottom wings and the analogous shadows on the top, because I feel like it would have given a similar effect to what we saw earlier with the color temperature shifting technique. In real life, the bottom wings of this moth would probably have deeper, darker shadows because they sit beneath the top wings. So now that I've had that realization, that's definitely something I'm gonna keep experimenting with in future coloring pages. Using a mix of complementary and analogous shadow colors, yeah, I feel like it's gonna give a more realistic vibe to my coloring pages, just some more depth and dimension that's more accurate to real life. I think we're onto something, people. I think we're onto something. But with all that being said, just remember that all the techniques that I've experimented with and explored with you in today's video aren't hard and fast rules that will determine whether or not you're a successful colorist. It's not about one technique being right and another being wrong. It's about building up your colorist toolbox so you have more effective ways to create the vibe and look that you want your coloring pages to have. If you made it this far into the video, firstly, thank you so much. And I would love to know which technique in this video was your favorite and that you were gonna try for yourself at home. Let's chat about it in the comments. But until next time, happy coloring, friends. Have a good day, have a good life, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.